I woke the next morning as if emerging from a nightmare, a haze of disbelief, sorrow, and a heavy, unyielding emptiness. In the cold silence of our bathroom, that one small lipstick tube had shattered the carefully constructed facade of trust. Every drop of water that cascaded down the tile echoed the relentless drum of betrayal that now defined my days. I sat on the cold floor, wrapped in a blanket of raw emotion, and realized that life, once so familiar and comforting, had become a labyrinth of hurt and unanswered questions. The revelation that my wife had been working late was not just a lie, it was the beginning of a painful journey toward confronting the truth, and perhaps, a way to reclaim myself. In the hours that followed the discovery, I drifted in a numbing stupor. I couldn't bring myself to call her. I couldn't face the woman I'd once known as gentle and caring, now cloaked in the shadow of infidelity. Instead, I sat alone in our dimly lit home, the silence punctuated by the persistent hum of the heater and the ticking of a clock that seemed to mark every second of my loneliness. I began to pace the living room, each step an echo of a life that was once secure and now lay in ruins. The evidence in the shower, a small damning object, had exposed a secret that shattered everything. I felt as though my entire world had been upended, every promise we'd shared crumbling into dust. In a desperate bid for clarity, I turned to my journal. I wrote feverishly, capturing the raw torrent of emotions that threatened to consume me: anger, despair, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. My pen scratched out words that I barely understood even as they emerged, a mixture of regret for moments lost and fear of a future where trust might be forever broken. I questioned every small sign I had once dismissed, the furtive glances, the late return calls, the whispered phone conversations. Each memory now formed a jigsaw puzzle, piecing together a portrait of deceit I never wanted to believe. I felt as if I were drowning in a sea of my own unspoken doubts and fears, wondering if the woman I loved was truly someone I had known at all. Days bled into nights, and I found myself retreating into a solitary existence. I skipped meals, lost track of time, and sought refuge in the only places that offered solace: my desk, the quiet corner of our living room, and the barren sanctuary of our bedroom, which now seemed a mausoleum of intimacy. I avoided the mirror, unable to face the haunted reflection of a man betrayed. Each night, I replayed that fateful moment in the shower, the shock of finding the lipstick tube, the cold water washing away my hope, and with every recollection, I felt my heart contract with a mixture of grief and anger. In the midst of that internal storm, I reached a turning point. I realized that if I allowed this pain to define me, I would become a prisoner of my own bitterness. I could either let the wounds fester into a permanent scar or choose to use them as the fuel to rebuild my shattered self. With trembling resolve, I decided to seek professional help. I contacted a therapist who specialized in relationship trauma and betrayal. Our sessions were raw and often agonizing, filled with tears, long silences, and moments when I couldn't bring myself to speak. But slowly, the therapist helped me unravel the tangled mess of emotions, guiding me to understand that my wife's betrayal was not solely a reflection of my inadequacies, but also a symptom of deeper issues that had plagued our relationship for far too long. I began to see that the hurt I felt was not just about the infidelity, it was about the betrayal of trust, the erosion of a bond that I had assumed was unbreakable. In our sessions, I confronted the painful reality that I had, in my own quiet way, contributed to the gradual distancing between us. I admitted that while I prided myself on providing a stable, predictable life, perhaps I had been too complacent, too silent about my own needs and desires. This painful introspection was not easy. It forced me to face my vulnerabilities head-on, to accept that the foundation of our marriage had been built on a delicate balance that could be upset by even a single, careless moment. As the weeks turned into months, therapy helped me slowly piece together the fragments of my identity. I started journaling again every night, not just as an outlet for my grief, but as a roadmap for rediscovering who I was beyond the betrayal. I wrote about the good times we had shared, the small moments of tenderness, the shared dreams that once promised a future together. I recalled how, even in the quiet routines of our life, there was beauty and love. Those memories became a counterbalance to the bitter taste of infidelity, a reminder that not all was lost, that I could still rebuild a life defined by resilience and self-respect. I also began to channel my anguish into creative pursuits. I dusted off my old camera and started taking long walks in the early morning, capturing the raw beauty of a city waking up from the grip of night. The act of photography, of focusing on the intricate details, the play of light on rain-soaked streets, the quiet determination of people hurrying to start their day, became a meditation, a way to see beauty in even the most painful moments. Each photograph was a small step toward reclaiming my vision of the world, a world that, despite the betrayal, was still full of hope and possibility. At work, I threw myself into projects with a single-minded determination. I had always been diligent and committed, but now every meeting and every project carried an additional urgency. I set ambitious goals, not as a way to compete with the betrayal that had shattered my personal life, but as a declaration to myself that I was more than this heartbreak. My colleagues, noticing my newfound intensity, began to see me in a different light, not as a broken man, but as someone who had weathered a storm and emerged with a quiet strength. Slowly, I began to rebuild my professional reputation piece by piece, and every success, no matter how small, felt like a personal victory against the weight of my own despair. In the midst of all this, my wife eventually returned home. I won't sugarcoat it. Her return was not triumphant, nor was it filled with clear promises of reconciliation. She came back quietly, with a look of deep regret etched on her face, and an air of sorrow that seemed to have aged her overnight. That evening, we sat together in our dimly lit living room, a room that once resonated with shared laughter and love, now heavy with unspoken tension. She didn't speak much at first. Her silence was a long, heavy pause that spoke volumes about the pain and confusion on both sides. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did, for the lies, for everything." Her words were tentative, almost lost in the silence, but they carried the weight of 1,000 regrets. I listened, my heart torn between anger and a desperate longing for the love we once shared. I asked her questions, about that night, about the affair, about what had driven her to seek solace in another man's arms. Tears welled in her eyes as she recounted her feelings of emptiness and longing for something beyond the confines of our routine. She admitted that the allure of excitement, the promise of an adventure, had clouded her judgment. "I thought I could find something more, something thrilling," she said, voice quivering. "But all I found was a hollow emptiness that made me realize too late what I had lost." Each word cut deep, a painful reminder that sometimes the pursuit of what seems like a dream only leads to a nightmare. That night, as we lay in the silence of our broken bed, I reached out tentatively. For the first time since that devastating discovery, I allowed her hand to rest in mine. It was a small gesture, fragile and uncertain, but it carried the weight of a long, arduous journey toward healing. In that simple touch, there was a spark of possibility, a hope that maybe, just maybe, we could begin to piece together the remnants of a love that had been shattered. Over the following weeks, we both committed to the long, difficult work of rebuilding our lives, together and individually. We attended couples counseling, where we learned to communicate our pain and our needs without judgment. We discovered that forgiveness is not an event, but a process, a slow, sometimes painful journey that requires time, understanding, and a willingness to confront the darkest parts of ourselves. I learned that my betrayal had exposed vulnerabilities that had been ignored for too long, and she learned that the comfort of routine, while secure, could never replace the passion of genuine connection. We began to establish new rituals, quiet evenings where we shared our thoughts, weekend walks that allowed us to speak honestly about our fears and hopes, and moments of intimacy that were cautious yet meaningful. Slowly, the icy barrier between us began to thaw. I started to see her not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as someone who had lost her way and was now trying to find her path back. I understood that the journey to redemption required both of us to let go of the past, not to forget it, but to learn from it and use it to forge a future that was more honest, more resilient. In my own heart, I continued the process of rebuilding. I filled my journal with reflections on the nature of trust and the complexities of love. I began to understand that every scar, every tear, was a part of my story, a story not defined by a single moment of betrayal but by the strength to rise again. I took solace in small acts of self-care, a morning run that cleared my head, a quiet dinner with supportive friends, a book that spoke to the resilience of the human spirit. Each act was a reaffirmation that I was more than the sum of my failures, that my worth was not diminished by the actions of others. Months later, as spring broke through the long, cold winter, our home slowly started to echo with tentative laughter and gentle reconnections. We still had our challenges, moments when old wounds resurfaced, days when trust was fragile, but we both chose to move forward. I learned to forgive, not because I had forgotten the betrayal, but because I recognized that holding on to the pain only meant living in the shadow of it. I began to see forgiveness as a gift I gave myself, a way to unburden my heart and open up to the possibility of love that had not been tainted by betrayal. That journey was neither swift nor easy. There were nights filled with tears, days when anger flared unexpectedly, and moments when silence seemed to stretch between us like an unbridgeable gulf. Yet with each painful step we grew. We learned to communicate openly, to express our needs without fear, and to rebuild trust through small, consistent acts of kindness. I discovered that true intimacy comes from embracing vulnerability, and that every honest conversation was a brick in the rebuilding of a connection we once took for granted. As I write these final reflections, I sit on our back porch under a starlit sky, the cool night air whispering promises of new beginnings. The memory of that fateful night, the discovery in the shower, the cold evidence of betrayal, and the subsequent unraveling of our shared life, remains etched in my heart. Yet it no longer controls me. Instead, it serves as a reminder of the price of broken trust and the incredible strength it takes to reclaim one's identity. I have learned that healing is a lifelong journey, one filled with setbacks and small triumphs, and that true redemption comes not from forgetting the past, but from learning to live with it and let it guide you to a better, more authentic future. My wife and I are still on that long road, one that is often rocky and fraught with painful memories, but every day we choose to move forward. We choose to believe that love, when nurtured with honesty and mutual respect, can weather even the darkest storms. I have learned to find hope in the smallest gestures: a shared smile, a hand extended in reconciliation, a quiet conversation in the early morning light. These moments, though fragile, are the building blocks of a future where trust is slowly rebuilt, where the scars of betrayal become symbols of resilience and growth. Now, as the night deepens and I close my journal, I feel a quiet certainty within me. I know that I have reclaimed my dignity, that I have learned from my mistakes, and that every painful memory is a stepping stone toward a stronger, wiser version of myself. The journey is far from over, and there will be days when the shadows of the past loom large. But I stand ready to face them, with courage, with vulnerability, and with the unyielding belief that even the deepest wounds can eventually heal.